Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So we're going to continue on with car reviews today, and perhaps with the most infamous for being absolutely terrible Group 1 car, the Nissan GT-R LM. This car itself is just one of those weird and wonderful cars that kind of appears in the racing world once every few years just to be never seen again. But there is a good reason for that with the GT-R LM. I'll talk about its real world racing history, as well as talk about it in the context of GT7 as well. But first of all, we need to have a look at the price of this thing. 1 million credits this thing will set you back. As you can see, it falls in the Group 1 category at 876.35 performance points. This thing itself is actually an FF drivetrain, meaning it's front wheel drive. 604 brake horsepower, 880 kilograms and turbocharged. So overall, quite a strange vehicle for the FF layout alone. This is what makes this perhaps one of the most bizarre cars that is actually in GT7, falling into that Group 1 category. So let's jump straight into the review. Okay, so the GT-R LM, this car just feels like one of those random vehicles that kind of appears, tries something different and completely fails. Things like the Delta Wing as well, in my opinion, kind of fall under this category. Maybe not as disastrous though as this car right here. So let's quickly talk about its real world racing history. It was entered in the 2015 24 Hours of Le Mans. I remember there was a lot of hype around this car, obviously Nissan's first full prototype since the late 90s with the R391, I believe, all the way back then. And obviously their return was, to be expected. It was to, basically build up a ton of hype around the car. It was Nissan returning to prototype racing, but then this thing kind of got revealed, and I just remember a ton of news articles about it, surrounding the event and the build up to the event, wondering how this thing would do. Obviously a completely different vehicle to what we usually see with the LMP1 machinery of the time, obviously full front wheel drive drivetrain. So obviously it was entered in the race, but how did it do it? So 3 cars entered and basically none of them finished. There was the number 21, 22 and 23. So in terms of their qualifying times, how did they get on? It went absolutely terribly. They were the last 3 places of the LMP1 times. They were 20 seconds slower around a single lap than the Porsche 919 Hybrid, which is also featured in GT7 as well. So that just goes to show you how uncompetitive and terrible this car was. So overall, in terms of the positions themselves and how it went for the race, the 21 car, should I say, retired on lap 115 with a suspension failure. 23 car retired on lap 234 with gearbox issues, and the 22 car finished the race but was not classified as it failed to complete 70% of the race winning distance. And that was it. The car was then promptly retired, never to be seen again. And there we go. That is the racing history of the GT-R LM. It was just an absolute disaster. Again, just from the articles alone that was coming out, we knew that this car would perhaps struggle, but I don't think anybody really expected it to be just that bad. It entered Le Mans, it completely flopped beyond belief, even being slower than an LMP2 car in qualifying, and then none of the cars actually managed to, get a proper final position. That's how bad it went for this vehicle. However, does that mean I absolutely hate this vehicle? No. For me, like I said, it's just one of those special vehicles that kind of appears, does something weird and wacky, and then disappears from memory until all of a sudden, a few years later, it's brought up in the form of a video game or something like that. A more recent example of a car like that is with the latest WRC game with the Seat Carboda, a car that was basically long forgotten in terms of the WRC, and then all of a sudden appears in that game and everybody kind of wants to get behind the wheel of it. It wasn't necessarily anything absolutely special. It was just one of those kind of what I call a unicorn car. It just comes out of absolutely nowhere, appears and then just disappears, just to be brought up from the memory bank a good few years later. So for me, the GT-R LM is kind of that in the sort of more recent prototype era. So no, it's not a successful car, it's not a very good car, and to be honest, it does show in GT7 as well. It really isn't a competitive vehicle. If you're going to be wanting to use something in Group 1, you're more than likely going to want to absolutely avoid this vehicle like the plague. In terms of, you know, how it performs up against the other LMP machinery, obviously not including the likes of the VGTs and stuff, then it's a similar story. It's just a very, very uncompetitive car. However, just because of what this thing tried to do with an FF layout and, you know, that crazy Nissan look, it really is a unique looking car that, you know, really does, you know, the backlights and stuff looking like the GTR and stuff, you know, really kind of appeal to me for just being such a weird and wonderful vehicle. So I don't hate it on a looks perspective or just what the car is itself, but I really have to admit that this car is just absolutely terrible from a performance standpoint, both in real life and obviously within GT7 as well. So obviously one of the big standout features of this car is the FF layout itself of the vehicle. Now you may be wondering that, you know, if you haven't tested this car out before, what is it actually like to drive an LMP car with an FF layout? And I'll be straight up, you can't necessarily tell until you're massively on the edge of this car. You really need to be pushing, and then you kind of get this feeling that, yeah, this is definitely a bit of a strange car. Something doesn't feel right. It's running wide constantly. It can't necessarily put the power down as well as something like, say, the Toyotas or the Porsches. And then you may go ahead and just kind of dive into the stats and realize it's an FF layout. So whilst at the lower speeds and such, when you're not absolutely on the ragged edge of this vehicle, you may not even notice that it's actually that drivetrain. However, once you are on that limit and you are pushing as hard as you can, it really does kind of show its ugly face. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't particularly feel nice to drive overall. It really can sort of catch you by surprise at, you know, at times you may be absolutely flying through the corners and then all of a sudden it just wants to run out wide and run into a barrier, and that's kind of just what you get with the LM. So yeah, you can notice it. You just need to be really pushing the vehicle till it massively kicks in and you start realizing that, you know, something just isn't quite right. So no, overall it's not a particularly good car, but I do massively appreciate it for at least what it tries. However, let's have a look at what's important with these hot laps. As you can see, this is our overall lap time leaderboards, and it pops itself in 7th place with a performance point rating of 876.35, which is actually quite a bit more than the GR010 hybrid from 2021, which you can see was still 6 seconds faster in a class that is much more, I guess, toned down than we saw with the LMP1 cars. The other LMP1 car, which is a hybrid 16 of the Toyota TS050, absolutely destroyed this thing in terms of lap time. So no, overall the Nissan GTR LM is not a good car. I do appreciate it for what it tried and for just being weird and wacky, but I have to admit that this is perhaps the most terrible Group 1 car in existence. Let me know what you think down below. I'd be really interested to see if there is maybe a group of people that kind of fanboy over this thing. Like, again, from a looks and just what it is, it's really interesting, but from a performance standpoint, I just can't see it being ever really any good. So like I said, let me know what you think down below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.